I think you're in for a real treat this evening. Our speaker this evening is Emma Teeling. She is a world-renowned scientist. Began her career, I think, at Queen's?
UCD.
UCD. And that was your undergraduate at UCD.
Yes.
And you went to Queen's and Scotland.
Yes.
And you were in Maryland,
Yeah.
Bethesda, at the NHI, I suppose it's not. And I think you were in Alberta as well.
Yes.
Yes. You were elected to the. She was elected to the MRIA in 2016. She's a zoologist, a geneticist, and a genomist.
Genomicist.
Genomicist. Yes. Genomicist. Who specialises in phylogenetics and the genomics of bats. Her work includes understanding of the bat genome and the study of insights and other mammals, and give a better understanding and management of the aging and a number of conditions, including deafness and blindness in humans, which I think this research could help us as we get older, maybe, some of us. She's a co-founder of Bat1K. This is a project is to map the genome of all bat species. She is also concerned with understanding of places of bats in the environment and how to conserve their ecosystem. She is a full professor at the University College Dublin, and she is, I think, quite well funded, was one of the sites that I looked at.
Depends on the year. It depends on the year.
This evening, she's going to tell us about bats, myths, magic, and mayhem. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing all about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So can everybody see the screen? That's good. So what I want to do tonight, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for coming out to listen to me talk about these magnificent animals. I'm given a chance to talk about bats, and I will take it at all times. And I have been unbelievably fortunate to have spent really the past 25 years of my life studying these beauties. Now, what I want to do tonight, it's Halloween. I want to explore some of these myths about our bats. I want to talk about really why studying bats can reveal some of their magic. I'll explain what I mean by that going through the talk. But also, mayhem is associated with bats, and we'll discuss the real mayhem that caused major havoc. But before I start, if you guys can see, what is this thing? What is it? It's a bat. What type of bat? No, it's Halloween. What do you think it is? Yes, it's a vampire bat. Look at this beauty. Wonderful teeth, magnificent adaptations on its thumbs. But these vampire bats have probably caused the problem for bats. We're going to read a quote from Batman. To instill fear into their hearts, I became a bat, a monster in the night. So people are frightened of bats. There are bats, there are vampire bats. There are 3 species in the world. They live in South Americas. They preferentially don't feed on humans. They will feed on cattle, on chicks, and so forth, but they're not found here. But the problem with bats is they really get a bad rap. People are frightened of them. And I speak with people, and they're like, oh, and people who are scared of bats probably wouldn't come to this talk. But one of the reasons why I think there's such a fear is this association with blood sucking and things that come out at night. And that bats use a completely different form of sensory perception to orient. They use sound. So if you close your eyes, if you want, you can see what it feels like to be a bat. And they're able to avoid all these obstacles just using sound. But we're, as species, as humans, we're particularly visual. So for us, bats are very, very alien. But it keeps going. This was this horror movie in 1979, Nightwing. In the dead of night they come, swift and silent and savage. Now bats are getting a bad rap. And this is just now in 2022, Morbius. Anybody seen this? Again, vicious blood-sucking creatures that are going to come out and kill us all. And typically, if you look around at all of the houses, what do you see? You're not seeing little furry cats or mice. You're seeing bats as evil creatures. So there's lots of myths around bats. Now, I'm going to ask you guys a question. It's Wednesday night, I'm tired. What is the top myth? When I say the word bat, what do you say? What do they do? What are the things you've heard they do? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Spread rabies. Okay. Next.
Some people associate all bats suck blood.
Very good. That all bats drink blood, suck blood, live in caves. Anything else?
Wasn't there something about getting caught in your hair?
Getting caught in your hair. Very good, very good. Come on, any more? So these are all of the myths that people think about bats. But you guys are excellent because top myths. Bats get tangled in your hair. Now this is a myth because they're actually not going anywhere near your hair. What they're doing is they're swooping in and feeding the insects that will be around you in the summer. And sometimes, maybe the young ones maybe got caught in hair sometime, but I've got long hair and work in bats and they've never been in it. Another myth that we didn't talk about, all bats are blind. It's not true. I've done a lot of research in the past 10 years, looking at genes involved in our vision and seeing what bats can see. Bats can see, they're not blind. All bats drink blood. Wrong. There are 3 species of bats that do lap blood. They make a little incision and creep up when they drink the blood. Vampire bats are awfully interesting. But they're one of the most social and giving of all species of mammals. Because what they'll do is they live right on the edge of metabolic existence. There's not much energy in blood. And if a sick roost mate, if she can't go out at night, what will happen is they'll go off, they'll feed enough blood, and they come back and they regurgitate the blood for these sick individuals. They mind their roost. So they're wonderful animals. Bats are not important. That's another myth. They are one of the most important species. We're going to talk about this for our ecosystems to function. All bats have rabies. Not true. Some do, but not all of them. Bats are evil. Absolutely not. So I hope we can put all of these to bed. Myths over and done with. All wrong. But what I want to do is I want to talk to you today about the magic. What are these really unique adaptations that make bats special? That if we can understand how the bats can do this, we can hugely improve human life. So this is the magic that they have. And really, I see them as superheroes because the cure to some of society's greatest problems lies within studying bats. So what are our greatest society problems? We've got climate change. We know that's a huge, huge one. But another issue that pertains to humans is this idea of healthy aging. So people everywhere are living longer. But despite our increased lifespans, our health spans have not yet caught up. We'll talk about this. And what does this mean? This means that if we do not want to live the 20 years of our life, our last 20 years, incapacitated, we've got to find ways to expand our health span to our lifespan. But infectious diseases. And we all know the problem of when a novel disease gets into the human race and can move around very, very quickly. We know the effects of these new infectious diseases, that they can be devastating. So we've got to find solutions to those. And they lie within this magnificent order of mammals. So all of these pictures were taken by my very first PhD student, the brilliant Dr. Sebastian Puschmann. But 1 in 5 of every single living mammal on this planet is a bat. So there's lots and lots of them. They're found throughout the entire world. They're absent only from the extreme polar regions. But I see these as nature's experiments. So bats, our modern group of bats, they diverged from all of the mammals about 65 million years ago. And they evolved unique adaptations. What is the one thing that bats do that no other mammal can actually do? No other mammal, yet they can fly. No other mammal has achieved true self-powered flight. So let's think, what are the other things? So we go, what about, you know, squirrels and these other kind of sugar gliders? Well, they just fall with style. They do not fly. But flight is extremely metabolically costly. A bat will expend up to 3 times more energy over the course of their lifespan just flying alone than a mammal just running around. So flight is a difficult thing to evolve, a difficult thing to achieve, and a difficult thing to maintain, but they can do it. They also can use laryngeal echolocation. So they make sounds out of their larynx, and they will emit them to their nose or their mouth, and they listen for these echoes coming back. That allows them to make this acoustic image of their environment, which means that they can orient in complete darkness. Look at this beauty. This is a horseshoe bat. Great big ears, tragus's strange nose leaves, and they're very unusual because of this unique form of echolocation. Thomas Nagel, the famous philosopher, once said, if you truly want to experience an alien life form on this planet, lock yourself inside a wardrobe with an echolocating flying bat. So part of this instills our fear because they can do things that we cannot do. But you also have these group of bats. If anyone was ever in Australia, so the great big large flying foxes, they look like dogs. And you can see these guys don't use echolocation. They're still nocturnal. They have keen nocturnal vision. And when you want to look at the changes that happen between species that can use vision to orient or use sound to orient, is a big question in evolutionary biology. Studying bats gives an insight into how this changes and its effect. But this is really, really important. So bats are crucial for our ecosystems to function. They are keystone predators. So in Ireland, all our bats are insectivorous. What they do is they feed on insects and maintain the balance within the ecosystems. Within the US alone, it's estimated between $3 to $55 billion are saved every year by bats feeding on the pests of agricultural crops. So take out the bats, it's going to cost us lots of money. Also, our ecosystems won't work. But what bats can do in the tropics is they also pollinate key crops, tequila plants, pollinated by bats. Any undergraduates, graduate students here? No bats, no tequila. Not good. They also are major, major seed dispersers across the tropics. So we need them to function, for our ecosystems to work. But more importantly, to those 2 grand challenges, the secret of everlasting youth, now that's a little facetious, but the ability to live long, 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 healthy lives with limited signs of aging, it lies within studying bats. And I'm going to tell you why. And this is their real magic. Also, they have a very, very, very unique immune system, different to other mammals. And this immune system has shown potentially allows them live with viruses that kill most other mammals. Potentially Ebola, SARS-like viruses, MERS, Marburg. I'm going to talk a little bit about COVID-19. We discussed Mayhem, about what's going on with bats. But they've evolved a very unique immune system that allows them to live with these viruses without being sick. And the question is how? But how are we going to answer this question? Well, first of all, I've been on a mission now for 20 years to try and uncover these unique adaptations. But how would you go about studying what bats have evolved to allow them to do this? Well, you've got to look right at the blueprint of what makes a bat or makes a human. You've got to look at their genome. Let's remind ourselves, what is a genome? Your genome is the full complement of all of your DNA that lies within every single one of your cells. It's the blueprint to allow you to interact with your environment to make you who you are. Humans have a human genome. Bats have a bat genome. But if you want to uncover the raw biological basis of the unique traits, you need to sequence these genomes. So I set up Bat1K, as you heard. Myself and Sonia Verne, she's the other co-founding director, where we wanted to sequence the genome to beautiful reference quality so we could actually work out what was going on of every single living bat species. So we could understand their unique adaptations. We wanted to push out the boat here. Most genomes at the time were sequenced from model organisms. So you'd have mice and little small roundworms. So C. elegans, mice, flies. humans. But it was hard to sequence bats. So we decided this is what we need to do. So we were lucky enough, we were able to raise the money, raise an entire group of people who were all part of Bat1K. And we worked out, how do you sequence the genomes of bats? What tissues do you need? What are the methodologies you need? How do you sequence them? How do you assemble them? How do you analyze them? We had to make the tools we needed to uncover their unique adaptations. And we were able to publish this in July 2020 in Nature, which is really important, something that you really want to do as a scientist. Now, it probably helped there was a pandemic going on at the time. They thought it came from bats, but we still did. What this meant is that we made the tools. And now our 1,400 species of bats, what we've done is we've moved forward. We're on to phase 1. We've now sequenced 100 genomes. There was 6 in that paper, 100 genomes. And we're trying to analyze them. So we made the tools, right? So we've now started to say, okay, we can look at this DNA in bats. But how does this help us address this grand challenge? So let's remind ourselves. So it's wonderful that people everywhere are living longer. So this is this expected increase in lifespan. Our current lifespan's here. Expected increase in lifespan, we can live to maybe 150. But there's a problem with all of this. And the problem is that we do not understand the aging process properly yet. Aging. I say the word. You could explain it. You know it. You see it. You can see an old dog versus a young dog. But what causes it? What drives it? Why does it happen? It's difficult. And it's inherently complex. So this was a landmark paper that was published, whereby they were able to categorize the things that go wrong as we age into 9 different categories. And don't worry about all those. I'll talk us through these. But they were trying to say, well, what caused it? Is it because these things change? But we urgently need to understand aging much better. Because as I said, by 2050, there will be a 380% increase in people over the age of 80 globally. And that sounds wonderful, but we still have a problem. Because our probability of acquiring a disease of the old age by the time we're 60 hasn't changed. By the time you're 60, we all have a 70% probability of having Alzheimer's, dementia, rheumatoid arthritis, all of us. So if we do not want to spend the last 20 years of our life as incapacitated elderlies, we need to think how we're going to do this. How are we going to slow down the aging process? How are we going to match our health span to our increased lifespan? Is this possible? Now, this is ridiculous, because menopause is the one thing we have not yet been able to change. So ovaries age the fastest of everything. But what do we know about human aging? Well, the longest lived person on record is Jeanne Calment. She lived till she was 122 years and 164 days. She smoked till she was 117. The only reason she stopped was because she couldn't see the end of her cigarette, because her vision went. She drank 2 glasses of wine every day. She ate chocolate, had olive oil, did all of the things you're not supposed to do. We had 1 child, outlived everybody, but she's extraordinary. But that seems to be the edge of human aging to date. But why can't we find ways to slow down aging? I mean, we're scientists, what's going on? And here's the myths I want us to think about. Some people argue that we're in a pro-aging trance. We are accepting we're accepting the fact that you have to age. Oh, it's inevitable. There's no way to stop it. Well, a lot of people that I work with think there absolutely is a way to stop it, if we could understand what's going wrong. And then before we all get too old, find some intervention. So we need to question ourselves. Also, I'm going to argue that we've been looking at the wrong study species since we started doing this. And we've been studying aging in species that are very good at dying. So we study aging in things like lab mice or in these flies that have very short lifespans. Because if you want to study aging in something, you need to see if you do something to it, can it live longer? If the species you're studying might be a bowhead whale living over 200 years, we're not going to live long enough. But I'm going to argue and hopefully convince you that the only way to understand how we can achieve long health spans is by studying bats. by studying species that have naturally evolved the longest health spans of all organisms. Now, how? What does this mean? And what is this graph here? So, in nature, there is basically a law or a pattern. Small things, they live fast and they die young. So body size can predict how long you can live for. Big things live slow and live long. Think of a bowhead whale living over 200 years. Think of a mouse or a shrew. Shrews sometimes live only 6 months. Mice no longer than 4 years. And what this thing here is this longevity ratio here. This is the ratio of maximum longevity, how long a species can live for, divided by how long you predict it can live for given its body size. And typically there's a correlation of 1. And what you find here is,
Turtles must be outliers there as well.
but they're not mammals. But turtles are big. Yeah, we leave those fellows alone. Turtles are some of the longest lived ones, and some fish and some clams and all of the rest. But within mammals, what you'll find here, here's human. There's a naked mole rat. But here are bats. So this initial study, this was done 2010.
The longest livers live in the dark.
The which?
The longest livers live in the dark.
Yeah, there might be something about that too. So bats, so if you were to equate for body size, this fellow holds our record. So this is Jan Calment of bats. This is Myotis brantii. This is a bat was caught as an adult, this is the record, in Siberia, in Novosibirsk. Was ringed, because the only way to age a bat is when you ring them, was released and was caught now 43 years later. No signs of aging in the wild. And what's unique is that this species weighs 1/3 of a lab mouse. Not supposed to be possible. You correct for body size is the equivalent of 250 human years. No signs of aging in the wild, no doctors. They're amazing. And it's not just this species, it's many. So I was intrigued and I wanted to ask the question, well, how do bats defy the aging process? What do they do? What do they evolve to allow them to slow down aging? Why are they so different? So for the past 20 years nearly now, well, it's 11 years working on it and 20 years thinking about it, we set up a study to study these wild bats, because how do you study aging? How do we study aging in lab animals? Well, typically you'd take samples from something the day it's born, take it during the year, take it when the thing dies, and you can study aging. But the problem with these wild bats is that the longest lived species, we can't keep them in captivity. Our husbandry is no good. So I had to find a population. I'm going to show you what we do. We had to find a population in France, Brittany, France, of this longest lived Myotis bats. This is Myotis, lived up to 37 years. And we picked this population because in 2010, this grassroots organization, Brittany Vivante, caught the entire population. And what they did was they put little microchips into every bat. So it was in July. A bat that was caught in July as a baby in 2010 had a little microchip like you put in your dog or your cat. What happens is the females come back to the same place that they were born to have their babies. So we can catch the colony year after year after year. What we do is we take a couple of drops of blood, as you can see here. We take a wing punch. We take non-lethal samples, biological samples that we can study in my lab back in Ireland and look at the biomarkers of aging and see how they change in bats. But we had to be very careful, because you can't be going around killing them. We can't be like reverse vampires. So we were dealing with small amounts. Now the reason why this population is unique is because we know their age. Because what happens is the only way that you can age a bat is when the bats are babies, and they grow really quick, they're like birds. So when they're born, what you can do is you look at their finger bones, you shine a torch. If they're not yet fused, this bat's less than 1. If they're fused, they could be 1, or they could be 37. And so we had a unique population. So we decided to look at 3 of these major markers of aging, so those hallmarks of aging. And the first are telomeres. So what are these things? These are the protective caps on the ends of all our chromosomes to protect our DNA. Every time your cell replicates, they get shorter and shorter and shorter, because we can't add on DNA in one of the ends, right? Our chromosomes have ends. So what eventually happens is after multiple cellular replications, so your cells divide, they become old. And they're now, the telomeres get so short, they signal that this is now an old cell, and what has to happen, it should self-destruct. Sometimes it does not self-destruct. It sits there, it emits this SASP, and it becomes a zombie cell, and it makes other healthy cells zombies. So telomere shortening can drive aging. The other catch with all of this is in cancer. What cancer does is cancer switches on an enzyme in a cell to make it express, it's called telomerase, to make it be able to stop the telomere shortening. Essentially, this is why your cancer cells become so difficult to remove. So we want to know, well, what was going on in bats? Because the length of your telomeres can predict, potentially, they used to think how long you could live for or how healthy you were. Let's look at mitochondria. Now, what are mitochondria? Mitochondria are the small engines in our cells that produce energy. And again, bats have a really high metabolic rate. They're producing lots and lots of energy because they fly, which means they're producing lots and lots of byproducts. And these byproducts break up the cells and can make you old. But we also wanted to look at their blood transcriptome. We wanted to say, well, all right, do bats show the same level of dysregulation in the expression of their genes as we do as we age, or have they found another way to age? So again, these are the telomeres. They're like the aglets at the end of your shoelaces. And as you age, you get shorter, shorter, shorter. Chromosome no good, cells should self-destruct. So they've argued longer telomeres, you should live longer. So what happens with bats? What do you think? These are the longest of bats, don't show signs of aging. Should the telomeres shorten or not? Very good. Except I couldn't believe it. So in every other species that you look at, their telomeres shorten with age. We do. Chimpanzees do. Birds do. Sometimes birds don't. Depends on the species, but most of them do. But telomeres do not shorten with age in the longest lived bats. I thought there was something wrong. I said I should get back in that lab. Go back in. Get more data. Do everything. And we found another population. It was incredulous. But even now, as we've kept this study going, they're not shortening with age in the longest lived bats. So how are they doing this? Because the only way to do this is to switch on that enzyme that cancer does, if you want to do it in a non-egg or sperm cell, but yet they don't get cancer. So how are they achieving telomere maintenance without getting cancer? So we're looking at that right now. We'll look at their mitochondria, this powerhouse, this engine. Because again, what happens is it used to be called the free radical theory of aging. You have a beautiful, healthy mitochondria. It's working, it's firing, but it's producing kind of these byproducts of metabolism. And what that then does is these byproducts, it's called ROS. Anybody who's on any antioxidant stuff or any gym stuff knows about ROS. It causes mutations in the DNA of the mitochondria. This causes to produce more ROS. It gives a really vicious cycle. So theory should predict that bats should have a huge level of damage, oxidative damage from their ROS because of their high metabolic rate. But when we looked at it, we found that they have produced a high level of the bad stuff, but they show no signs of damage. So it looks like they repair or they remove this free radical damage, which is different than what we do. How are they doing that? They've had to evolve ways to be able to maintain themselves. We'll also look at the blood, this anti-aging gene expression. So what we did is we sequenced the message that comes from the genes. It's called the transcriptome in young, middle-aged, and older bats. And we want to look at what changes with age in these bats. What are the age-related message changes that happens? We also want to look at what was controlling it. Because if we could find the switch that controls this anti-aging message the bats may have, we'd be able to maybe look for the switch in us. And we really want to see, well, what did they do? So what did we find? So again, I'll talk you through this. But the real major take-home message of all of this is that as bats age, they increase their ability to repair their DNA, repair their genome. They increase their ability to make sure and maintain that their cells are dividing accurately. So in red means as they age, there's a huge increase in all of the genes involved, the increase in the expression of the message of all of these genes. Here's human. There's mice. Don't mind wolf. We just put that in for an example. But the major difference is we don't do it as we age. As we age, our ability to repair our DNA tails off. So a lot more damage can happen. But the bats don't. So they're able to repair the DNA, and they're able to maintain the division of their cells, which was extraordinary. The other thing that I couldn't believe, so we were out in the field collecting these blood samples from these long-lived bats. It was like a horror show in the beginning, trying to make the project actually work. But as the French say, impossible n'est pas français. You make it work. And what I wanted to see, well, could we convince people that what we were finding was really real? So what we looked at, what are the gene expression? What do the bats do that's different than us? And what we found is this here. So this is an example that bats show a similar expression with age of genes known to extend lifespan in model organisms. If you are to knock in a second copy of this gene P10 into a mouse, it'll live twice as long. And here's age, and here's the expression of this gene. And in bats, they naturally increase the expression with age. Red means increase with age, there's a bat. Blue means decrease with age, there's a mouse. We're somewhere in between. Similar with this is MYC, it's a MYC gene. If you want to slow down aging in mice, you knock it out. Bats naturally do this. And so I was like, my goodness, it works. We're able to show that bats have naturally evolved known life extension mechanisms. And I was so proud. And I showed it to Luke O'Neill, great mentor of mine. And he said to me, so what? We already know that this works. What are they doing that's different? And this is what they're doing that's different. So we then looked for genes that are upregulated or downregulated that are different in bats to all of the other mammals. There are new ones. We found a whole series of these. Don't worry about these names. I find them difficult as well. But the point was that we found 22 new potential target genes. The bats have evolved different ways to regulate these genes that maybe underlies their extended lifespans. So these are targets we're looking at. What we also did is we looked at the switches. We looked at these little microRNAs that go in, and they're the things that switch the genes on and off. And again, we found a whole series of these switches that the bats are using that maybe we could use in ourselves. MicroRNA. RNA is a new treatment. It's a new drug. You see with all these vaccines. It's not that far-fetched to think you could use this bat regulator, bat switch, to switch on the good stuff in us as we age. Other things that we looked at that were quite exciting. So the one thing that as we age, aging is this accumulation of damage. Damaged cells, damaged proteins, think of, I've got a sore knee, or I fell, or my son's just broken his finger, he's only 16. That's going to cause him damage. But aging is damage. And as we age, our ability to remove damage within our cells, again, decreases. But what we found in our bats was that as bats age, their ability to remove damaged proteins from their cells increases. We found this by studying the bats in the wild. I was able to take bits of bat wing back to my lab, grow them, so we'd have living bats, but in Petri dishes, and challenge them, and show that actually what we found in the wild, when you go back into the lab to validate it, really did happen. But bats, as they age, they can remove this damage. We also were able to, and this is kind of a little bit tantalizing right now. So if you remember on that graph I showed you of the longevity quotient, the big long-lived bats up here and then some of the shorter-lived ones, one species of short-lived bat. This is a beautiful bat in Panama. And what we did is we took blood from adults, we sequenced all the genes that are expressed and compared the difference. And what we found in the longest-lived bat versus the short-lived bat, what was the major difference? The major difference really is that the longer-lived bats show less anti-longevity genes, okay? So there's a difference of things that are bad for you. It looks like both bats can express the same level of stuff that's good, but the shorter-lived bats have more bad. And this is something, so maybe more bad causes aging rather than same amount of good. So you don't want any bad. So now we're looking at these short-lived bats versus long-lived bats to get a better handle on what's the most important thing for longer, healthier lives. So how do they defy the aging process? DNA repair is huge. You've got to fix your genome. It's the blueprint. You don't want it photocopied wrong. It will lead to nasty things. Keep it good. Remove damage. You've got to remove the damage. Aging, people have now argued, is just a stochastic accumulation of damage. If you're better able to remove it, better sweeping brush, you don't suffer. Telomere maintenance seems to be really important in these longest lived bats. How are they doing it? But the other thing I didn't talk about yet was that as they aged, they had this balanced immunity. MicroRNA, those little switches, potentially modulate all of this. Not everything, but some of it. But let's get back on to balanced immunity. So as we age, one of the major signals, rheumatoid arthritis, potentially Alzheimer's. This all stems from a really overactive, hugely inflamed immune response. People have argued that your immune response is the major driver of all of aging. But bats, as they age, what they seem to be able to do is have this aggressive inflammatory response. And they'll find that you have this huge increase in these inflammation genes, but they also have a huge increase in these anti-inflammation genes. So they achieve this true, perfect balance. But why is it important? So we talked about the myths, we talked about the magic, but what about the mayhem? So let's really, really think about mayhem. Well, we all lived through this because we're still sitting here. But SARS-CoV-2, this is an underestimation, but greater than 7 million deaths. This is what the World Health Organization says now, in such a short time. Complete, absolute chaos. But we got lucky. We got really, really lucky. Because if you think about it, so it's a coronavirus, highly, 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 highly penetrable. But we were lucky that SARS-CoV-2 was not so lethal. If it had been MERS or some of the other coronavirus that we were worrying were coming out, we'd still be on our knees right now. If it had that high level of infectivity with an equally high mortality rate, we wouldn't be here now. But we are. Good. But let's remind ourselves, the worst year ever. Awful, awful, awful. But what's this got to do with bats? First paper that came out. A pneumonia outbreak associated with the new coronavirus of probable bat origin. So if you really want bats to be getting a bad rep, use that as a title. The virus came from bats. Now, did it or didn't it? What happened? Well, let's think about this. Why bats? How could they create such complete mayhem? So, the one thing that is true, a fact, the facts now, the highest diversity of coronaviruses are found in bats. When you look within different types of mammals and you look for the diversity of viruses, you will find that bats have evolved to be able to live with coronaviruses. Multiple different types of coronaviruses you can find in bats, and they do not get sick. They don't get sick. They've evolved ways to deal with them. But coronaviruses are one of the most promiscuous of all viruses that, again, they're very good at hopping between species. So bats have evolved to live with them. You'll find some of the genes that bats have, the ACE2 receptor, do you remember talking about that during the COVID pandemic? How does COVID get into the cells? In bats, it's completely different because they're changing all the time so they can live with them. What is also true is SARS-CoV-2 has never, ever, ever, ever been found in bats. What we did find in bats, though, is that the SARS-CoV-2 ancestors, the closest virus to SARS-CoV-2 is found in wild horseshoe bats. There's a huge diversity of them. You can see them all around Asia. So what you find is that the closest living virus to bats is found, the closest living virus to SARS-CoV-2, the original SARS-CoV-2, You find them, there's pangolins here, there's SARS-CoV-2, but you find them. So when you go look for where this virus came from, the most likely place is it did come from wild bats. But there's 40 to 70 years of missing evolutionary history. So we're missing something. So, and more than likely now, people have argued, when you look at all of the facts, that it actually was, again, some spillover event that happened. Now, what does a spillover event mean? And how likely is it? What do we need to think about future zoonotic events? Again, these are myths. Myths happen that these zoonotic events are unlikely. It's been estimated there are 12 billion zoonotic events every year. That means a virus trying to get from a cat into you, a virus trying to get from a dog into you. Again, we're mammals. And viruses are promiscuous, can hop a lot. There's a study done in Cell, which is kind of a bit depressing, where they went and they sampled all of these different animals around Southeast Asia. They looked at these 1941 game animals, 18 species, 5 they've had 102 mammal-infecting viruses, 65 newly described viruses, 21 high-risk pathogens. Potentially it comes from this. In Southeast Asia, in places like that, there is farming of wildlife. There are wildlife species all put together, and they're sick. And this is the perfect breeding ground for zoonotic events. So we're going to have to look at that if we don't want this to happen again. But what about bats? So bats hold the answer to working out how we're going to go and deal with these viruses. The vaccine was a game changer for us. Again, we're here now because we had a vaccine. But wouldn't it be better if we could find ways that we could treat all type of infections by modulating our immune system? Now we do this with drugs. You take aspirin. You would say, well, here's your antivirals. Anybody who ever had shingles, you know you take an antiviral at some stage. But bats hold this Goldilocks response. They know when to give just enough antiviral response after enough viral response. So I see bats as this unconventional mammalian system of disease tolerance. How can we find ways to live with these pathogens? So we did a study in my lab whereby we were able to take bat bone marrow. There was this poor bat in this population study in France. You're not allowed to kill bats in Europe, they're protected. But this bat had been attacked by now. She was a baby, she'd lost her arm, and she'd been still fed by a mother, so she had to be euthanized. So we euthanized her with our vets under permits. We're able to take the bone marrow, which is stem cells, back to the immunology lab in Trinity, and we're able to turn those stem cells into immune cells. We're able to ask the question, when bats experience an infection, what happens? So we did this in the lab, we mimicked it, and we looked at the inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory response. What we found was, it was extraordinary. When you compare bat immune cells with mice immune cells, bats really, really quickly have this highly aggressive antiviral response. But then what they do equally as quickly is they dampen it with an equally aggressive anti-inflammatory response. So bats balance this aggressive inflammatory response, which allows them to neutralize the pathogens in the virus, with the more aggressive anti-inflammatory response, which allows them to throttle their own immune response. So if you remember, the thing that people died from when they had a COVID-19 infection was their own out-of-control immune response. So bats have found a balance. And this is the balance we need to think about. But can you see this when you look? We did all these genomes. But can you go and see? When you look at the raw material bats have evolved, could you see this balance or this change? Well, you can. I'll talk you through this slide. When we looked at the genomes, the DNA, of bats versus other mammals, we looked at genes that we know make this type of immune response, make that type of immune response. What we found in bats is they had lost a series of these genes. So they lost a whole entire set of genes that allowed them to make an inflammasome. So you know when, I've got cuts right now and you see it's all red. That's the inflammation caused by an overactive immune response, but it's needed to fight the bacteria that might be getting in there. Bats have evolved a different way of doing it. They switched some off, they lost them, And then they also expanded other ones. This is apobec. It's a gene family that allows, basically is used to chop up viruses. So bats have found a novel way to be able to balance selection, loss, and change. So we can look to bats and say, well, what do we need to tweak ourselves? Potentially, you could find drugs to do this. This is the other very cool thing. It is Halloween, so it's a bit creepy too. What we also did is think about, what does a virus do when it gets into you? How does it make copies of itself? It goes into your cell, it uses your DNA machinery to make copies of itself, but it also sticks itself into your genome. And so what you see, when we even look at ourselves, you can find, I call them these fossilized remains of viruses that somehow got into an egg or a sperm cell. So when you do this with bats, these are all bats down here in red, what you find that they have the highest diversity of fossilized viruses in genomes. So when you sequence their genomes, you can see the viruses bats can survive, and you could also then really understand a little bit more about how and what they can do. Which viruses can they live with, which can they not, and what is that, by looking at the genome, what is that immune response that allows them to achieve that? So they found the way. What we've also been doing is we've sequenced a whole bunch of these reservoir genes. So during COVID-19, we were allowed work and sequence these bat potential reservoirs, so the hosts of the ancestors of SARS-CoV-2. And you see extraordinary changes, slight little tweaks, big changes in their genome, which allow them to live with coronaviruses that we now need to explore more for us. But the one thing, how does this pertain to aging? So again, this is a hypothesis. Now, it's highly controversial. You know, I've got screeched at by many things, but I will stick with this. So I want you to think about it. Why have bats evolved these two unique traits? Well, what do? They fly. So again, flight is very, very, very metabolically costly. Takes them a lot of energy, causes lots of damage. And so bats are exposed to these endogenous stimulants all the time. Now, what I mean by that is that their DNA is broken up. Their mitochondria is broken up. It looks like, so mitochondria originally was a bacteria, all broken up. The immune system goes, wait a minute, we have an invasion. And so you get this real high inflammation. So they suffer, or they should suffer, from constant sterile inflammation because of all these endogenous stimulants caused by flight. But they've had to evolve ways to deal with it if they wanted to fly. They had to adapt their immune system to be calm. Have enough inflammation to fight the viruses, but also enough anti-inflammation not to constantly basically burn themselves out. They had to find ways to remove this cellular damage. So they had to be able to repair their DNA, which is here. They also had to be able to remove the damage, good sweeping brushes, and they had to find ways to restore to homeostasis. Now, all of these things are considered major drivers of aging. What does this mean? They have unexpected longevity, and they can tolerate these viruses. So they are our superheroes. I want to show you this. This is our beauty. I want to show you that I'm not making this all up. So this bat here I have in my hand, we're feeding her mealworm. We've caught her in France. She is 14 plus. That meant she was caught as an adult 14 years ago. And every year she's been having babies. So she could be 15 or she could be 35. Still pregnant all the time, no signs of aging, beautiful sable coat, and look at her flying away. So this is supposed to be impossible. They are not supposed to be able to do this, yet they can. And so I hope I've convinced you. Studying bats are going to allow us to address and find new ways that we can slow down aging. And also, more importantly than ever, is that really we can find new ways to help combat infectious diseases. And really, once we work at what the bats are doing, we can find ways to be able to potentially have drugs or change in lifestyle or something, we become more bat-like. In this way, I see them as our superheroes, not our villains. So I couldn't do any of this work without the amazing, amazing people I have that work in my lab. These are the most extraordinary scientists. We're awake 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning catching bats, dealing with all the ups and downs of the madness of working in the field, and also these brilliant collaborators. And thank you all for listening to me.
Now we know why Dracula, it wasn't the blood, it was the bats.
Exactly. Morbius, the same thing.
So you'll be able to take some questions?
Yes, please.
What's the advantage to bats living so long?
Yeah.
What's the advantage to bats living so long?
Well, they're going to
For their
have to live.
colonies?
Well, they have to live so long because they're very different to mice. They're much more like us. They only have one baby a year.
Oh, it's one baby.
It's one baby a year.
So I was thinking of exploding populations.
So they never ever do.
Okay.
And so what will have to happen is mom and dad both need to, so the female will need to live long enough to have had 2 pups to be able to replace herself and her partner. So again, this is the idea of potentially flight allowed for the evolution of the maintenance of self, and that usually means not having multiple offspring all the time.
What kills them in the end?
Kills them in the end. Bad weather kills them.
Weather.
So we've found that you'll see the telomeres will shorten when they experience a bad spring. So you got to think about the biology of what goes on. So these are the temperate bats, and these are the long-lived bats, ones that we have here. So what will happen is that they'll mate in August. They mate in the August, kind of September time, and then they go into their hibernation, and the females then, they come out of hibernation around April, and the baby starts to develop. But if it's a bad cold spring, the females slow down, they can slow it down. Development of the
That's
babies.
the balance again,
Yeah, again the balance, but that means the babies are born late. So they're going to be born much later. And that means that those babies then have to eat and eat and eat and eat. If they don't get really fat before hibernation, the chances are then it's another bad spring, they're gone, they're done for. And so weather, inclement weather has a huge problem. Other problem is owls.
Yeah,
So the owls love to eat them. Us, we kill them. Changes in climates usually, and there's certain things that there are certain viruses that can kill certain species. Like a Lulu virus they can't do well with. Or certain species in America are dying from white nose syndrome, so it's a fungus.
Okay.
So different species do different things, but they have no age-related mortality.
There you go. Very good.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, you spoke, well, you might have sort of answered there. You spoke about long-lived and short-lived bats. Well, I was going to ask about our 9 bats in Ireland,
Yeah.
but maybe they're all long-lived except when they have an accident. Is that right?
I would say of our 9 bats in Ireland, they're long-lived bats. Well, they're not on the lower end of that spectrum, but we need to have better mark recapture studies because we don't do enough of that here. We need to, because we only know how long they live for because you have some mad lunatic who tags them and then catches them. So Roger Ransom, those horseshoe bats, he has now the Guinness World Record, is that what it is, for the longest single study of any one individual. He went as a boy at 19. He's now 89, and he catches them, he knows them all. And so he knows how, and that's what we know they're not getting, because he has that dedication. He'd run down, and there's pictures of him with the same bat, very proud, and he says he has to keep himself skinny, because he has to fit in this hole to get into the roost. So I'm like, why don't you make it bigger? No. So that's his, but you need that level of commitment. So we're trying to find ways you could age them, but I still think, so with our bats, what we know of them, the majority of them here are the long-lived ones.
Yeah, that's great. Good. Thank you.
What got you interested in bats?
Well, I really wanted to study cats, and I badly, it was complete chance actually. I wasn't joking. I really wanted to make choice behavior in cats, and I wrote, PhD proposal after PhD proposal, and couldn't find the funding. And then I was wandering around UCD, and I saw this advertisement saying, please apply for a PhD to come up to Queen's Belfast and to study the evolution of echolocation by sequencing genes and making evolutionary trees. I thought, oh, this person's got money. So I sent him my proposal on cats. And then he convinced me otherwise. And then I had, the husband was there at the time doing his PhD, so Belfast seemed a nice place. And then 6 weeks of doing this because I thought, well, I'll still work on cats. Forget it. I'm still here.
Cats probably catch bats.
Oh, cats do catch bats if they're fast.
No, it's for the recording. Oh, yeah, so, about the aging of bats, wait, I lost my question. If you put them in captivity, some zoos have bats in captivity, do they then keep living on because you take away the factors, weather, cats and that kind of stuff?
But you do add the factors of stress. So they don't live forever in captivity, but the longest lived of those fruit bats are found in captivity. Now, fruit bats do great. You know, I don't know if you've ever been to any fruit bat colony because they just mate and eat. And
There's a lot of them in Dublin Zoo.
used to be, they're gone now.
Gone now.
They've eyes. Look at those, they're nice looking too.
Aye,
But so no, they don't live forever and ever and ever. I don't think the husbandry is correct. I don't think anything can ever live forever and ever. I think they can live way longer than expected, and they've evolved mechanisms. So I think there's stress in captivity that we don't really understand. Definitely the insectivorous ones can't, but no, they won't live for all eternity. If we had a perfect environment, could they? I don't know.
Were there any mammals before bats that could fly?
It's a very good question. I would say no, but I don't know all the fossils. Things that, mammals, well, dinosaurs, yes, but with mammals, which is a good question, the only thing that would be like them, volatantia, which are those flying lemurs, potentially they've argued that maybe there were some of those that were trying to evolve that, but really, in the fossil records, self-powered flight in mammals you only see in the fossil bats. The oldest perfectly preserved fossil bat's 55 million years old only. So what's happened, we need to look at, I mean, I'm trying to find these transition fossils to uncover all of that, but it's a good question. So I'd say no, with the caveat that we haven't looked properly. Yes, in Antarctica.
Is there a correlation between the size of bats and how long they live?
Not really, and because you'll find that, of course, that LQ, so some of those are big ones and the smaller ones are down here, but I'm not sure is that because we just don't have decent enough marker capture studies. But not really. The longest lived ones are kind of somewhere in between the size part. Not the teeny tiny ones, not the big huge ones.
Any other questions? Well, I think we should thank Emma one more time for a superb talk and